Shock and horror across the world at the deadly Easter Sunday church and hotel attacks in Sri Lanka leave religious and political leaders condemning the violence, which struck on the holiest day on the Christian calendar. Garrett Tenney has more now from Washington. Garrett.
These horrific Easter morning attacks have really unified the global community. Religious and political leaders from dozens of countries and various faiths are condemning the bombings, including Pope Francis. Sri Lanka is home to about 1.6 million Christians, and the vast majority are Roman Catholic. This morning, during his traditional Easter Sunday blessing at St. Peter's Basilica, Francis expressed his sorrow over the Easter morning attacks and prayed for those who were injured and who lost their lives.
I want to express my loving closeness to the Christian community, targeted while they were gathered in prayer, and all the victims of such cruel violence. I entrust to the Lord all those who were tragically killed and pray for the injured and all those who are suffering as a result of this dramatic event.
At least 27 foreigners were killed in the attacks, including several Americans. The U.S. ambassador to Sri Lanka offered her condolences, tweeting, "Deeply saddened by the senseless attacks in Sri Lanka today. Our thoughts are with the victims and their families. We stand with Sri Lanka's people at this terrible moment." Sri Lanka's foreign ministry says at least 5 British citizens are among the dead as well. UK Prime Minister Theresa May tweeted, "The acts of violence against churches and hotels in Sri Lanka are truly appalling, and my deepest sympathies go out to all those affected at this tragic time. We must stand together to make sure that no one should ever have to practice their faith in fear." The Dutch foreign minister confirmed at least 1 Dutch citizen was killed as well, tweeting, "Horrified by the terrible attacks on this Eastern Sunday in Sri Lanka. Our thoughts are with the victims, including 1 Dutch national at this moment. The Netherlands has passed its heartfelt condolences to the Sri Lankan people. We stand with you." Dozens of world leaders, including President Trump, have also said they stand ready to help Sri Lanka any way they can in the wake of these horrific attacks. Arthel?
Garrett Tenney, thank you.
For more on the Sri Lanka terrorist attacks and the targeting of Christians across the globe, let's bring in Niall Gardner, director of the Heritage Foundation's Margaret Thatcher Center for Freedom. You know, Niall, officials are blaming, quote, religious extremists, and there were warnings that a radical Islamic terrorist group was planning attacks against churches. Your thoughts about all this?
Well, firstly, Erica, this is an unspeakable act of absolute barbarism and inhumanity, an act of monstrous evil. And this really has all the hallmarks of an Islamist terrorist operation, extremely well coordinated, well executed operation across several cities in Sri Lanka, and with over 200 deaths and 450 injured. And certainly there's speculation that a small radical Muslim group in Sri Lanka may be involved in this, an organization known as TNJ. But I think that any Islamist group within Sri Lanka would have had some kind of support from a larger Islamic terrorist network, and I think that in many respects these attacks were similar to attacks that ISIS has carried out in recent years in the Philippines, in Egypt, in Iraq, and across the world. Also, there's some similarities to the Mumbai attacks in November 2008, which killed over 100 when a luxury hotel was targeted there. So I think that we are looking undoubtedly at an act of Islamist terrorism. The question is who exactly is responsible for this, but I would say that the evidence suggests a very heavy ISIS footprint in what has happened here.
You're obviously targeting churches at the time of worship on Easter Sunday, and you just mentioned the hotels. One of them is a luxury, really luxury hotel, the Cinnamon Grand, and the AFP, the French press, is quoting the manager of that hotel, saying a man registered the night before, said he was on business, identified himself as Mohammed Aziz Mohammed, that Mr. Mohammed was standing with the plate during the breakfast line. I mean, imagine how cruel and heartless and barbaric this is, standing with the plate, pretending he was getting breakfast with everybody else when he blew himself up and killed scores of people in that hotel. I mean, where does this barbarism come from, and how can a civilized world stop it?
Well, these are vitally important questions, and as the Archbishop of Colombo mentioned this morning, that these terrorists had behaved really like animals. And we are dealing really with a vicious Islamist ideology that has to be confronted and emphatically defeated. And if indeed ISIS is behind these attacks, I think that ISIS is trying to send a message that even though they have lost their caliphate in Syria and Iraq, they still remain a deadly threat across Asia, the Middle East, parts of Africa as well, and also in Europe as well. And we've seen a large number of Islamist terrorist operations on European soil in recent years. And so I think this is certainly a message that is being sent by either ISIS or potentially Al-Qaeda as well, that they are still in business. And there needs to be a very strong response here. Over 30 nationalities have been targeted, actually, in this attack, including the loss of several Americans, several British citizens. There has to be a very strong response from the United States and Great Britain and the free world against these terrorists.
Specifically, what do you think we should do?
Well, I think the reality is that we have to target ISIS cells, Al-Qaeda operations across the world, and this involves a coordinated response with our allies across the world. But we do have to use, undoubtedly, military force wherever needed against these terrorist networks. There has to be real payback here for the terrorists. We have to crush these networks. We have to ensure that there is no safe haven anywhere on earth for ISIS and other Islamist terrorist organizations.
And do you believe now that we are in a place in this world where there is indeed a sufficient global effort and response that is coordinated and specific to fight this, or that's just not there?
Well, I think that there is a willingness on the part of some countries, and I think that the United States, of course, has to lead the response here against Islamist terrorism, and the United States has led the response for the last few decades. And without a doubt, it's U.S. leadership that emphatically crushed ISIS in Iraq and Syria, and we are going to see continuing U.S. leadership to, frankly, wipe ISIS off the face of the earth, really. And this kind of savagery targeted against Christians here, this monstrous evil has to be defeated, and we do have to see a very, very robust response to what has happened here.
Now, Gardner of the Heritage Foundation, Iran is the #1 state sponsor of terrorism. This type of radical philosophy is spread across the globe and is a great threat to the civilized world. Niall, thank you.
Thank you very much.